Hello everybody, this is Freddy from We Scale Your Brand, where we help 6-figure and 7-figure e-commerce brands scale through Facebook ads. And this video is all about audience testing, the do's and don'ts of audience testing. It will be a very fun video, and I would say let's get right into it. So before we go over the account structure and how to actually do creative testing, I would say let's go over a few questions first, so that you have a basic overview of what creative testing, audience testing is useful for. So basically, first question, what is the purpose of audience testing? And basically the purpose of our audience testing campaign is to find new audiences that perform consistently at or below our target CPA, or at least, to find, if you don't even have one audience that is good, kind of to find the audience that comes closest to it, right? Eventually, you want to find new audiences if you already have stable ones that outperform your current audiences, right? So super simple. And basically how the structure looks like, campaign name, also you can name that however you want. Objective, conversions, optimize for purchases, then CBO or ABO, this kind of depends. I will be answering the question later in the video. And then we have our ad sets, right? In the ad sets, you obviously have your different interest groups or lookalikes that you want to test. Depends purely on you. You can obviously test whatever you want. Rule of thumb though is I wouldn't usually narrow down anything. I wouldn't go too niche. Still try to keep the audiences broad and open. Then placements, as always, automatic placements, lowest cost bidding model, attribution window, depends again on how much you're spending. Usually I like to go for 7-day click, 1-day view, especially if you're only doing Facebook ads. However, if you are also spending on Snapchat, Google, email, that kind of stuff, then I would consider switching it to 1-day click. But if you're just starting out, you can definitely leave this on 7-day click, 1-day view. And then, for the ads, which ads should you use for testing? And this answer is super simple, your previous best ads. So ideally, you do your audience testing after you've done your creative testing. You already have creative winners, which you can then, which consistently perform first of all, and which you can then use in your audience testing campaign to test new audiences, right? So I like to call these ads control ads, right? And why is that? What is a control ad? A control ad is basically ads that consistently perform, in our current testing or scaling campaign, right? Ideally, step is, you do creative testing first, then you kind of scale that up already, you put your best ads into your scaling campaign, scale it up, and then you do your audience testing to find new audiences for your scaling campaign, right? So you want to make sure that you already have ads that consistently perform in your current, at least in your current testing setup, right? Then, why are we using the same ads for every audience? Even though, some audiences might be different, and you might want to use different ad copy or different headlines to kind of approach to the audience in a better way. And why you can do that, what I would recommend doing is first of all doing that in your creative testing campaign before you do any changes to your existing ads, right? And the way why you want to do that is we want to isolate one variable. In that case, this variable is the audience, so we can be sure that if something works, it's the audience, right? If you, for example, take a video and you're targeting a new audience and you kind of change the headline to make it more appealing for the audience, you can't say with 100% certainty whether that is the kind of new headline, new ad copy that is working, or whether it's the audience, right? This is why you always want to make sure if you do some new audience testing that you still keep or use your current best performing ads, right? Because also they perform, you should be able to scale your best performing ads. Therefore, there should be high, certainty that these work, or that if a new audience works, it's because of the new audience and not because of you changed something on the ads, right? So, that is quite simple in my opinion. Then the next question may come up, when should you turn off audiences? When there are no results, when should you turn off or at least one of the audiences? And that is kind of similar to the creative testing setup. Usually, it also depends on your budget, how much you're willing to kind of lose on the front end, but usually after 5 to 10x, target CPA, if your target CPA goes $40 and you already spend 400 and you're still nowhere close to being in a good CPA number, a good ROAS number, then I would highly recommend you turn off those audiences. If you have some more budget and you really want to make sure that this audience probably doesn't work, I usually I like to run the audiences also till around 10 to 15x target CPA. So if your target CPA is $50, I like to run it till like up to 500, maybe even like 750 before I turn ads off. If your daily budget is even higher, I still would recommend running an audience for at least 2 to 3 days, more like 3 days before you even think about turning it off. When should you move the audiences to your scaling campaign, right? You've got a new audience, it's getting super high ROAS. When should you move that to your scaling campaign? Also, the answer here is pretty straightforward. Basically, if they consistently perform better or at least equal to your current audiences at 50 plus conversions a week. So especially with audiences, you don't want to make it too early, because if you introduce a new audience into your scaling campaign, it's basically the whole kind of system changes, especially if you're using CBO. Facebook has to adjust again. So you really want to make sure that this audience works. So what I like to do is, wait till I get at least like 50 plus conversions a week, so that the audience gets out of learning phase. And if it consistently performs at that kind of scale, then I'm willing to move it to my kind of scaling campaign. And then should you use a separate campaign for audience testing? If not, how should you handle that? And the answer here is also easy to understand, in my opinion. So basically, you don't need a second campaign for audience testing. This depends on how many SKUs you have and on your overall budget, right? If you have a high budget and you want to put a high emphasis on testing audiences because you need new audiences because all of the other ones are like saturated or whatever, then you can definitely create a second audience where you just test a second campaign where you just test audiences. However, especially if your budget is low, you want to keep your overall Facebook ad system lean and as simple as possible. What I usually do is either CBO or ABO for my, I have one testing campaign where I put all of my tests in. So whether it's a creative test, an audience test, I put them in there. So I have less campaigns that I need to manage. So especially if you have a low budget, in my opinion, it doesn't make sense to have multiple campaigns for testing purposes. So then AB or CBO, which one of these should you use? And this again depends on how, risk averse you are, or how much you want to test, what your budget is. And basically with ABO, you can test, or you can isolate tests and test probably faster. The CBO, or with CBO, the focus is more on efficiency. So let's say you have one testing campaign with a CBO and you have one creative test in there and one audience test. No, the creative tests make it 80% of the budget at a good ROAS, at an acceptable ROAS for you. And then on the other hand, your audience test only gets 20%. But this is fine, especially if you're on a low budget, because you're still getting the ROAS number that you aim for. And, if you kind of want to focus on efficiency, then I would go for a CBO. If you want to focus on quick tests, isolating tests, then go for ABO. Again, this is a bit more risky in terms of budgeting, but I hope that I explained everything in a clear and understandable way. If you have any other questions about audience testing, feel free to let me know in the comments. Just kind of as a quick recap, we can use either 1 or 2 campaigns for testing. So we can have one testing campaign for creative testing and audience testing. We can also separate those. You still optimize for purchases. You separate. The way you differentiate the kind of audiences is by using different ads. So you always want to make sure that you use the same ads for every single audience that you test. These ideally should already be proven ads that perform at a larger scale, and you should move audiences to your scaling campaign if they consistently perform at 50 plus conversions a week. That's about it. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to let me know, and I hope you enjoyed this video.